People say bedtime horror stories are harmless until something answers back in the dark. You're about to hear things most people are too afraid to talk about. And once you do, your nights might never feel safe again. Quick, before you fall asleep and forget, hit like and subscribe. And tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? That helps me know who's still awake when the shadows start to move. The sound of rain against the windows has always made me feel safe, protected, as if the water creates a barrier between me and the world outside, a curtain of white noise that wraps around me like a blanket. I used to love falling asleep to it. Used to. Now, when I hear rain tapping against glass, I remember that night, the night I spent in the old Victorian house on Willow Lane, the night I learned that some places don't want to be disturbed, and some secrets should remain buried, no matter how accidentally they're uncovered. I'm a property surveyor. I assess buildings for structural integrity, for insurance purposes, for potential buyers. It's normally a straightforward job, measuring, noting, photographing, documenting the skeleton of a building, its strengths and weaknesses, its potential problems. The Victorian house on Willow Lane was just another assignment, a probate sale. The last owner had died, leaving no direct heirs, and the property was to be liquidated as part of the estate. My job was to assess its condition and value before it went to auction. The house stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in a small town about 40 miles from where I live. It wasn't particularly remarkable. A 3-story Victorian, the kind you find all over Britain, with bay windows and ornate cornicing, a small front garden that had grown wild with neglect. What was remarkable was the weather on the day I arrived. It had been sunny when I left home, but as I drove into the town, clouds gathered with unnatural speed, darkening the sky to a premature twilight. By the time I parked outside the house, rain was falling in heavy sheets, reducing visibility to a few feet. I sat in my car for a moment, considering whether to reschedule, but I'd driven nearly an hour to get there, and my calendar for the coming weeks was already full. Besides, the estate agent had left the keys in a secure box by the front door. I wouldn't need to wait for anyone. With a sigh, I grabbed my equipment bag, umbrella, and the old-fashioned iron key I'd been given, then made a dash for the shelter of the porch. The rain was surprisingly cold for late spring, and by the time I reached the door, my trousers were soaked from the knees down. The key turned in the lock with reluctance, as if the door itself was hesitant to grant me entry. When it finally opened, I was met with a musty smell of a home long unopened, dust, old paper with polish, and something underneath that I couldn't quite identify. Something vaguely medical, like antiseptic or formaldehyde. The hallway was dim despite the large stained glass window above the door. Dust motes danced in the color light that filtered through, creating a strange, shifting pattern on the faded carpet runner. To my right was a formal dining room. To my left, a sitting room. Straight ahead, a grand staircase curved up to the first floor. I began my survey methodically, as I always do, starting with the ground floor rooms. The house was fully furnished, frozen in time like a museum exhibit. Heavy Victorian pieces dominated. A mahogany dining table that could seat 12 leather-upholstered armchairs, glass-fronted bookcases filled with ancient, leather-bound volumes. The only concessions to modernity were a television from perhaps the 1990s and a telephone of similar vintage. The kitchen was a curious blend of eras, an Aga cooker from the 1950s, alongside a refrigerator from the 1980s. Copper pots hung above a large sink. The cupboards contained dishes and glasses, many still bearing a fine layer of dust, as if waiting for dinner guests who would never arrive. Throughout my inspection, The rain continued unabated, drumming against the windows with an insistence that began to feel almost deliberate. The clouds had darkened further, forcing me to switch on lights as I moved through the house. Many bulbs were burnt out, leaving me to work by the dim glow of the few that remained functional. As I climbed the stairs to the first floor, I noticed something odd about the family photographs that lined the wall. They spanned decades, from formal Victorian portraits to color snapshots from the 1990s. But there was a strange consistency to them. In each one, regardless of the era, a tall, thin man with silver hair stood at the center. It had to be different men, of course, perhaps a family resemblance passing through generations. But the similarity was uncanny, and in each photo, the silver-haired man had his hand on the shoulder of a child. Different children in different eras, but always with the same expression. Blank, empty, their eyes seeming to look for the camera rather than at it. The bedrooms on the first floor were as well preserved as the rooms below. 3 in total, each with heavy wooden furniture and floral wallpaper that had faded unevenly where pictures once hung. The master bedroom contained a 4-poster bed with dark blue curtains, now gray with dust. The adjacent bathroom featured a clawfoot tub and fixtures that might have been installed when indoor plumbing was first introduced to the house. I worked efficiently, making notes on my tablet, taking measurements and photographs, checking for signs of damp or structural issues. Nothing serious so far. Some minor water damage around one window frame. Hairline cracks in the ceiling plaster, but nothing that would significantly impact the property's value. The second floor, however, presented a mystery. According to the floor plan I'd been given, there should have been 3 more bedrooms and a bathroom, but when I reached the top of the stairs, I found only 2 doors. One led to a small bedroom that appeared to have been used for storage. Boxes stacked nearly to the ceiling, old furniture draped in sheets, trunks bound with leather straps. The other opened onto a bathroom, smaller than the one below, with a peculiar discoloration around the drain of the old porcelain tub. I rechecked the floor plan, confirming that 2 additional bedrooms should have been present. I paced the length of the corridor, measuring, trying to account for the discrepancy. The dimensions didn't make sense, based on the exterior of the house and the rooms below. There should have been more space on this floor than was accessible. That's when I noticed it. A subtle difference in the wallpaper pattern near the end of the corridor. A section about 7 feet high and 3 feet wide, where the floral pattern didn't quite align. I ran my hand over it, feeling a slight draft coming through. A sealed doorway, papered over, concealed its existence. Curiosity got the better of professional detachment. I took out my pocket knife and carefully cut along what I believed to be the edge of the hidden door. The old wallpaper came away easily, revealing the outline of a door frame. There was no handle, but a small keyhole was visible. I hesitated. Whatever reason someone had for concealing this door, it wasn't my business to discover. I was there to assess the property, not uncover its secrets. But my job required a thorough inspection of all spaces, and if there were rooms unaccounted for, they needed to be documented. With a mixture of professional obligation and personal curiosity, I tried the master key I'd been given. To my surprise, it fit. The mechanism was stiff with disuse, but after some effort, the lock turned with an audible click. The door swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. I fumbled for a light switch, finding one just inside the doorway. It clicked, but nothing happened. Power to this section must have been disconnected, or the bulbs had long since failed. I switched on the torch function on my phone and stepped over the threshold. The beam revealed a corridor extending about 10 feet before opening into what appeared to be a large room. The air was noticeably colder here, and that medicinal smell I'd noticed upon entering the house was stronger, undercut with something else, a moist, organic odor that reminded me unpleasantly of the biology lab from my school days. My footsteps echoed hollowly as I moved forward, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. The walls of the corridor were bare plaster, unpainted and unpapered, as if this section of the house had never been properly finished. The room beyond was large enough that my phone's torch couldn't illuminate it entirely. What I could see sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cold air. It looked like some kind of home laboratory or medical room. A large metal table dominated the center, its surface stained with dark marks that my mind refused to identify. Glass-fronted cabinets lined one wall, filled with bottles, jars, and medical implements. An antique wooden desk stood against another wall, its surface covered with notebooks and loose papers. But it was the far corner that drew my attention. My torch beam picked out what appeared to be a row of large glass containers, each about the size of a small refrigerator. I moved closer, an inexplicable sense of dread growing with each step. They were specimen tanks, 5 of them, arranged in a neat row, for contained cloudy liquid, objects suspended within that I couldn't make out clearly. The 5th was empty, its glass door hanging open. Against every instinct for self-preservation, I approached the first tank. As I drew nearer, the content became horrifyingly clear. Floating in the yellowish fluid was what appeared to be a human child, perhaps 8 or 9 years old. But it couldn't be a real child. It had to be some kind of anatomical model. Its skin was an unnatural white, its eyes closed as if in sleep. There was something wrong with its proportions. Limbs too thin, head slightly too large, features not quite formed correctly. I moved to the next tank. Another childlike figure, slightly older than the first, with the same uncanny wrongness to its appearance. The 3rd and 4th tanks contained similar specimens, each progressively older in appearance. My hands were shaking now, the torch beam dancing erratically across the grotesque display. I told myself these had to be models, perhaps used for medical study. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. No anatomical model would be preserved in fluid like this, and no model would have such specificity. The tiny freckle on the 2nd specimen's left cheek, the small scar visible on the 3rd's forearm, the uneven fingernails of the 4th. I backed away, my breath coming in short gasps, when a sound from behind made me whirl around. A soft, rhythmic tapping. For one desperate moment, I told myself it was just the rain against the window, but there were no windows in this hidden room. The tapping was coming from the desk, from one of the leather-bound notebooks that lay upon it. As I watched, frozen in horror, the cover of the topmost book lifted slightly, then fell back, lifted and fell, in perfect time with the tapping sound. I should have run. Any sane person would have fled that room, that house, without a backward glance. But some terrible compulsion drew me forward, toward the desk and its animated book. The tapping stopped as I approached. The book lay still, innocuous except the thin layer of dust that covered everything else on the desk, but somehow had spared this particular volume. With trembling fingers, I opened it. It was a journal, written in a neat, precise hand. The first entry was dated 1879. Today I begin my greatest work, the culmination of years of study and preparation. The authorities would never sanction such research, bound as they are by outdated moral constraints. But science must advance, and who better to drive it forward than one whose lifespan is not limited by conventional biological boundaries? The child delivered to me yesterday will serve as subject one. Preparation begins tomorrow. I flipped through the pages, each entry more horrific than the last. The journal documented experiments I couldn't fully comprehend, involving techniques both surgical and other. Techniques described in terms that seemed to blend scientific terminology with something older, something that sounded more like ritual than medicine. The final entry was dated just 3 months ago. Subject 5 has failed, like all the others, so close, yet still imperfect. The process of animation was successful, but stability could not be maintained beyond 72 hours. Tissue degradation accelerated despite all preventative measures. I grow weary of these failures after so many decades of work. Perhaps the fault lies not in my techniques, but in the raw material. Next time, I shall be more selective in my choice of subject. The Williams child who recently moved into the neighborhood shows promise. Such clear eyes, such vitality. A noise from the corridor made me look up sharply. A soft squeak, like a door opening on unoiled hinges. I closed the journal and turned, directing my torch beam toward the entrance. The doorway was empty, but the door itself was now closed. I was certain I had left it open. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding thin and strained even to my own ears. "Is someone there?" No response. But as I listened, I became aware of another sound beneath the ever-present drumming of rain. A soft, whispering sigh, like a gentle exhalation. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I moved toward the door, suddenly desperate to be out of this room, away from the specimen tanks and their grotesque contents. My torch beam swung wildly as I walked, briefly illuminating a section of the room I hadn't properly seen before, an area near the empty fifth tank where the floor was discolored, as if something had spilled and been imperfectly cleaned up. The door wouldn't open. The handle turned, but the door itself seemed to be stuck in its frame. I pushed harder, beginning to panic now, the confines of the hidden room suddenly feeling oppressive, the air too thick to breathe properly. That's when I felt it, a touch on the back of my neck, light cold, like the brush of small, damp fingers. I spun around, torch raised offensively, but there was nothing behind me, nothing visible, at least. Yet the sensation remained, a presence just beyond the reach of my senses. Watching, waiting, with renewed desperation, I threw my weight against the door. It gave suddenly, sending me stumbling into the corridor beyond. I didn't hesitate. I ran down the corridor, down the stairs, through the house that now seemed alive with whispers and half-heard movements at the edge of perception. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys in rain-numbed fingers, casting terrified glances back at the house. Was it my imagination, or was there a face at one of the upper windows? A small, pale face with eyes that reflected the light like a cat's? The drive home is a blur in my memory. I know I broke several speed limits, the wipers on my car struggling to keep up with the relentless rain. I remember calling the estate agent for my car, babbling about hidden rooms and things in jars, about journals documenting atrocities spanning more than a century. They didn't believe me, of course. A team was sent to investigate the next day, escorted by police based on my claims. They found no hidden door on the second floor, no secret laboratory, no specimen tanks with their grisly contents. Just 3 ordinary bedrooms, exactly as shown on the floor plan, with nothing more sinister than outdated wallpaper and some water damage from a leaking roof. The journal I'd taken, because yes, I grabbed it in my flight, clutched it to my chest as I ran, unable to leave behind the only evidence of what I'd seen, was dismissed as a work of macabre fiction. The estate agent suggested that the last owner might have been an amateur horror writer, and I had simply let my imagination run away with me after finding his creative writing. The house on Willow Lane sold at auction a month later. A young couple bought it, charmed by its Victorian features and undeterred by its need for modernization. They have a child, I'm told, a boy of 9 with bright, clear eyes. I've driven past the house once since then, on a day much like the one when I first visited. Clear skies suddenly darkening, rain falling with unnatural intensity. I saw the boy at an upstairs window, looking out at the rain. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw someone standing behind him. A tall, thin figure with silver hair, a hand resting on the boy's shoulder. But it was only a glimpse seen through a curtain of rain, and I can't be certain. What I am certain of is this. On rainy nights, when I lie awake listening to water pattering against my bedroom window, I sometimes hear another sound beneath it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like small fingers drumming impatiently on wood. And though I keep the journal locked in the safe deposit box in my bank, I swear I can hear the pages turning one by one, as if someone or something is reading it even now. And perhaps most disturbing of all, in my professional surveyor's report on the house, which I completed in a state of numb detachment in the days following my experience, I noted the property had good potential, requiring only cosmetic updates. I listed all 3 bedrooms on the second floor, just as they appeared on the original floor plan. I mentioned nothing about hidden rooms or specimen tanks, or journals documenting decades of unthinkable experiments. Because when I look back at the photographs I took that day, the ones that should show a blank wall where I found a hidden door, they instead show a perfectly ordinary bedroom. A bedroom I have no memory of entering, yet somehow documented in meticulous detail. So, if you're listening to this while rain taps against your window, take a moment to consider whether it's really rain you're hearing, or whether something else might be trying to get your attention. Something with small, cold fingers and eyes that have never truly been alive. And if you happen to pass by Willow Lane on a rainy evening, don't look up at the windows of that old Victorian house. Don't meet the gaze of the child who might be watching. Some things once seen can never be unseen. Some doors once opened can never truly be closed again. But most importantly, if you ever hear a rhythmic tapping on rainy nights, don't investigate its source. Don't open that book. Don't turn that page. Some stories aren't meant to be read, and some secrets should remain buried, no matter how accidentally they're uncovered. The rain taps against my bedroom window with gentle, insistent fingers. I've always found it soothing. That rhythmic patter, the soft white noise that drowns out the world's sharper edges. Especially on nights like this, when I'm alone in my flat with nothing but memories and a phone that hasn't rung in 3 weeks. Until tonight. I should explain. My name is Rebecca Clark. I worked as a crisis counselor for a mental health helpline. For 6 years, I spent my nights talking people on the edge, the desperate, the lonely, the afraid. Sometimes I helped. Sometimes I didn't. You learn to live with both outcomes in that line of work. Or at least, that's what they tell you during training. 3 weeks ago, I received a call that changed everything. That's why I no longer work at the helpline. That's why I now flinch when my mobile rings. That's why I'm telling you this story. As the rain falls outside and my hand shakes so badly I can barely type these words. It was a night much like this one. Late October. The kind of relentless autumn rain that feels like it might never stop. I was working the overnight shift. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Alone in the small office our organization maintains in an otherwise empty office building. Most of our volunteers work from the main call center crosstown, but I preferred the solitude of the satellite office, especially for night shifts. The building is old, a converted Victorian schoolhouse with high ceilings and drafty windows. During the day, it houses a few small businesses, an accountant, a graphic design firm, a travel agency hanging on by its fingernails in the age of online booking. At night, it's deserted except for the security guard who makes his rounds every few hours. My office was on the third floor at the end of the long corridor. Just a desk, a computer, a landline phone with a helpline routed to it, and a kettle for making endless cups of tea. The walls were thin enough that during the day, I could hear the accountants arguing about tax codes in the office next door. At night, though, the silence was absolute except for the rain against the windows and the occasional creaking of the old building as it settled. The shift had been quiet. Just 3 calls in the first 4 hours. All regular clients with chronic anxiety, who sometimes needed a voice in the darkness to help them through particularly bad nights. I knew them well enough. Martin, who couldn't sleep without checking his lock 7 times. Ellie, whose panic attacks always peaked during thunderstorms. Paul, whose trauma from military service manifested in hypervigilance that made every shadow an enemy. At 3:17 a.m., I remember the time precisely. Glowing on my computer screen, the phone rang again. I answered as I always did. Good evening. You've reached the Nightlight Helpline. My name is Rebecca. How can I help you tonight? There was no immediate response, which wasn't unusual. Many callers need a moment to gather their courage, to find their voice. I waited patiently, listening to what sounded like heavy rain on the other end of the line. Heavier than what was falling outside my window, a proper downpour. Hello. I prompted gently after 30 seconds of silence. You're safe here. Take your time. A voice came then, so faint I had to press the phone hard against my ear to hear it. A woman's voice, young but somehow weighted with age, if that makes any sense. I need help, she whispered. I think I might be dead. My training kicked in automatically. People in extreme psychological distress often express their emotional pain through existential statements. Feeling dead inside, being already gone. These are metaphors for depression, for dissociation, for the strange attachment that comes with severe trauma. You're talking to me now, I said, keeping my voice calm and even, so you're very much alive. But I hear that you're in a great deal of pain. Can you tell me what's happening tonight that's brought you to this point? A soft, strange laugh came through the line. You don't understand. I'm calling from the Blackwood Bridge. Do you know it? I did. Blackwood Bridge was an old stone structure about 20 miles outside the city, spanning a deep ravine. It had a grim reputation as a suicide spot. High enough that jumps were almost always fatal, remote enough that intervention was unlikely. I know the bridge, I confirmed, a new urgency in my voice. Are you there right now? Are you thinking of harming yourself? I'm not thinking of it, she said, her voice oddly distant. I already did it. 40 years ago tonight. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the drafty office. It had to be a prank call. Or more likely, someone experiencing a psychotic episode. A break from reality that made them believe they were a ghost or a revenant. I decided to stay in the moment, to engage with her reality while gently trying to assess her actual situation. That must be very confusing for you. I said carefully. Can you tell me your name? Catherine. Catherine Marsh. Catherine, thank you for trusting me with your name. Can you tell me more about what's happening right now? Are you in any physical danger? Another of those strange, weightless laughs. Physical danger? No, I'm long past that. But I'm trapped, Rebecca. Trapped in this moment, in this rain, in this endless night. And I need someone to help me. The use of my name startled me. I hadn't given my surname during my introduction, just my first name, as per helpline protocol. How do you know my last name, Catherine? I asked, the professional calm in my voice fraying slightly at the edges. I know many things about you, she replied. I know you live alone in that little flat on Cromwell Road, the one with the red door and the ivy growing up the side. I know you talk to your cat like she's a person. I know you're afraid of the dark, but too embarrassed to admit it. So you leave the bathroom light on and tell yourself it's in case you need to get up in the night. My blood turned to ice. Everything she said was true, even the detail about talking to my cat. Something I did in private, something no one could possibly know. Who is this? I demanded, professionalism forgotten. How do you know these things? I told you, she said, her voice suddenly closer, as if she'd move her mouth right up to the phone. I'm Catherine Marsh. I died jumping from Blackwood Bridge 40 years ago tonight, and I've been watching you, Rebecca Clark. Watching and waiting. Why? I whispered. Why me? Because you're going to do it too. My hand tightened around the phone. Do what? Jump. Just like I did. Tonight. That's not true. I said firmly, trying to regain control of the conversation and my racing pulse. I have no intention of harming myself. I think perhaps you're confused. No confusion, Catherine interrupted. I see all possible branches of the future from where I am, all the threads of what might be. And in every single one, you drive to Blackwood Bridge tonight, climb onto the stone parapet, and step off into the darkness. Why would I do that? I asked, playing for time as I tried to make sense of this bizarre call. There was no record of it on my computer screen. I realized suddenly, every call to the helpline was automatically logged with a number, even if it was unknown or blocked. This one showed nothing, just a blank space where the caller information should be. Because of what happens next, Catherine said, her voice dropping even lower. Because of who comes up the stairs when we finish talking. Because some fates can't be changed, only postponed. As if on cue, I heard a sound from the stairwell outside my office. The heavy fire door that separated each floor creaking open, followed by footsteps on the worn carpet of the corridor. That would be Kevin, the night security guard, on his 3:30 a.m. round. I'd grown used to this pattern over the months I'd worked there. We'd exchange a few friendly words. He'd continue his patrol of the building, and I wouldn't see him again until his 5:30 a.m. round. Except the footsteps didn't sound like Kevin's. They were lighter, uneven, with a strange dragging quality to them. That's not the security guard, Catherine said, reading my thoughts with terrifying accuracy. Kevin called in sick tonight. Don't you check the log when you arrive? I usually did, but tonight I've been running late. Hurrying up to my office without stopping at the security desk in the lobby. I hadn't seen who was on duty. Who is it then? I asked, my mouth dry with sudden fear. The reason you'll drive to Blackwood Bridge in approximately 47 minutes, Catherine replied. The reason you'll stand in the rain on that stone parapet and make the same choice I did all those years ago. The footsteps grew closer, stopping occasionally as if their owner was checking each office. My pulse quickened. There shouldn't be anyone else in the building at this hour. I should go, I said. I need to call security. There's no one to call, Catherine said, her voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. No one who can help you now. But I can, Rebecca. I can show you how to make it quick. Painless. All you have to do is listen. The footsteps had stopped. They were just outside my door now. I could see a shadow in the gap beneath it, blocking the dim emergency lighting from the corridor. Who's there? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. But the doorknob began to turn slowly, though I was certain I'd locked it when I arrived. I have to go, I whispered into the phone. You can't escape this, Catherine said, urgency now threading through her ethereal calm. But you can choose how it ends. The bridge, Rebecca, come to the bridge. I'll be waiting. The line went dead in my hand just as the door to my office swung open. What I saw standing there defies easy description. It had the rough shape of a man, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. Its proportions subtly distorted in ways that made my eyes hurt to look at it directly. It wore what might have been a security guard's uniform, but the fabric seemed to writhe and shift, as if alive or perhaps affected by some impossible wind. Its face was a true horror, not because it was monstrous, but because it was blank, completely, utterly blank. Not even skin, just a smooth, featureless expanse where features should have been. Yet somehow, impossibly, I could feel it looking at me, seeing me, wanting something from me. I screamed. I couldn't help it. The sound tore from my throat before I could stop it, primal and desperate. The thing in the doorway tilted its non-face, as if curious about the noise. Then it took a step into the room, its movements jerky, marionette-like. One hand, too long, fingers like pale spider legs, reached toward me. Self-preservation took over. I lunged to a window behind my desk, an old sash affair that I kept cracked open most nights for fresh air. With strength born of pure terror, I shoved it all the way up and climbed out onto the narrow ledge beyond, the rain immediately soaking through my clothes. There was a fire escape, rusted but functional. I half climbed, half fell down it, metal clanging beneath my feet, the rain making every step treacherous. Behind me, I heard something scraping against metal. The thing, following, I reached the alley behind the building and ran, not daring to look back. My car was parked 2 streets over. I made it there somehow, fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. As I finally wrenched it open, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. A tall, thin shape at the end of the street, moving with that same unnatural gait. I drove, no destination in mind, just away from that thing with its blank face and grasping hands. The city streets blurred past, near empty at this hour. Traffic lights changing from red to green to red again in a rhythm that barely registered. It was only when I saw the sign for the A47, the road that would take me out of the city toward the countryside where Blackwood Bridge stood, that Catherine's words came back to me. In every single one, you drive to Blackwood Bridge tonight, climb onto the stone parapet, and step off into the darkness. Was that what was happening? Was I fulfilling some predetermined fate? Driving toward my own death because a voice on the phone had predicted it? The rational part of my mind rebelled against the idea. I wasn't suicidal. I had no history of mental illness. There was no reason I would jump from any bridge, no matter how terrified I was. And yet, when I tried to turn the car around, to head back toward the city center, towards safety and people and light, my hands wouldn't obey. They remained fixed on the wheel, guiding the car inexorably toward the A47, toward the dark countryside, toward Blackwood Bridge. I tried to stop the car, to pull over, to call for help on my mobile. None of it worked. My body seemed to be operating independently of my will, as if I were a passenger rather than the driver. Catherine, I shouted into the empty car. "Is this you? Are you doing this?" No answer came except the drumming of rain on the roof. Heavier now as I left the city behind and drove into the countryside. The roads grew narrower, darker, the occasional farmhouse or village the only signs of human habitation. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, I saw in my headlights Blackwood Bridge, an arched stone structure spanning a deep ravine, a river rushing far below, swollen with rain. In daylight, it might have been picturesque. In the darkness, with rain sheeting down and lightning occasionally illuminating its ancient stones, it looked like a gateway to another world, a darker world. My car stopped in the small levee at one end of the bridge. The engine died. My hands, finally released from whatever force had controlled them, fell limply into my lap. "I won't do it," I said aloud, determined. "I won't get out of this car. I won't walk onto that bridge. And I certainly won't jump." As if an answer, my rear view mirror filled with light. Headlights, approaching fast from the direction I'd come. Another car, on this remote road at 4 a.m. in a rainstorm. Not a car, I realized as it drew closer. A van, a security company van. It pulled in behind me, blocking my exit. Its headlights stayed on, blinding me to whoever might be emerging from the driver's side. But I knew, even before I saw the too tall silhouette approaching through the rain, I knew what had followed me from the city. This was Catherine's prediction coming true. The reason I would choose the bridge over whatever waited for me in the hands of that faceless thing. I got out of my car. The rain was torrential now, soaking me to the skin within seconds. I walked toward the center of the bridge, my footsteps oddly loud on the wet stone despite the rushing water below and the pounding rain. About halfway across, I stopped and turned. The figure from the security van stood at the end of the bridge, motionless, watching. It made no move to pursue me, as if it knew I had nowhere to go, as if it could wait. "Catherine?" I called out, my voice nearly lost in the storm. "Are you here? You said you'd be waiting." The rain seemed to shift then, to fall in a different pattern directly in front of me. Droplets cohered, gathering into a vague human shape. The translucent outline of a young woman in clothing from another era, her expression sorrowful. "I'm here," said a voice I recognized from the phone. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the rain itself. "I told you there was no escape." "Why?" I demanded. "Why me? What does that thing want from me?" The rain figure drifted closer. "It doesn't want something from you. It wants you, your fear, your despair, your final moment of surrender as you step off the edge." "What is it?" "It has no name in your language," Catherine said. "It exists in the spaces between moments, in the shadows between heartbeats. It feeds on endings, specifically endings chosen in moment of absolute despair. Like suicide, I whispered. Catherine's watery form nodded. "It found me 40 years ago tonight. Drove me to this bridge just as it drove you. But I didn't understand what was happening. I thought I was fleeing a monster, choosing a quicker death over whatever fate had planned for me." Her voice grew softer, sadder. "I didn't realize my death was exactly what it wanted, what it had orchestrated." I glanced back at the figure waiting at the end of the bridge. It remained motionless, patient, inevitable. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "If there's no escape, if this thing has been hunting me, driving me to this point, what good does it do me to know?" "Because there's a way out," Catherine said, her rain form moving closer still. One I didn't know about until it was too late. One I spent 40 years discovering, trapped in this in-between place. Hope flickered in my chest. Tell me, it can only claim you if you jump of your own volition, if you choose your end. That's the rule it's bound by. I looked down at the raging river below, then back at the waiting figure. So if I don't jump, if I try to run past it, or if I just wait here until morning, it can't hurt me? Catherine's form wavered, droplets dispersing slightly in the wind before forming. It won't allow that. It will drive you to the edge, make you believe that jumping is the only option. It has ways. It will show you things, make you feel things, turn your mind against you until the edge seems like your only friend. Already I can feel it, a subtle pressure building in my thoughts, images flashing in my mind's eye, my lifeless body discovered in the morning by hikers, the perfunctory investigation, the few mourners at my funeral, a sense of worthlessness, of futility, growing by the second, the edge of the bridge seeming to call to me, promising peace, promising an end to the fear. I feel it, I gasp. It's already starting. What's the way out, Catherine? Tell me quickly. Someone else must take your place, she said, her voice laden with regret. Another ending freely chosen on this same spot. Only then will it release its claim on you. The implication struck me like a physical blow. You mean I'd have to convince someone else to jump? To die in my place? That's monstrous. Yes, Catherine agreed, her rain form seeming to bow its head. That's why I've been trapped here for 40 years. I couldn't do it. Couldn't condemn another soul to my fate. So I've existed in this limbo, neither fully dead nor truly at rest, watching the thing claim victim after victim, unable to stop it. Then why tell me at all? I demanded, the pressure in my mind increasing, the call of the edge growing stronger. Why make me feel like there was hope? Because there's another option, Catherine said, her voice brightening slightly. One I've only just discovered. If someone who is already dead, someone like me, chooses to move on, to stop resisting the natural order and go where I should have gone 40 years ago, that counts as an ending too, a willing surrender. Understanding dawned. You would do that? For me? A stranger? Not a stranger, Catherine corrected gently. I've watched you, Rebecca, on your lonely nights in that flat, at your desk at the helpline, talking people back from their own edges. You're a good person. You deserve to live. But what happens to you if you move on? The rain figure shrugged, droplets momentarily scattering with emotion. I don't know. Whatever comes after this life, whatever I've been avoiding out of fear all these years, it can't be worse than this half-existence. At the end of the bridge, the faceless figure took a step forward, then another. It had grown tired of waiting. It's coming, I warned. We're out of time. I know, Catherine said. Her rain form moved to the edge of the bridge, balanced precariously above the churning water far below. Remember this, Rebecca, remember that I chose this, that I found my courage in the end. I'll remember, I promised, tears mingling with the rain on my face. I'll remember you, Catherine Marsh. One more thing, she said, her voice already beginning to fade. When this is over, when you're safe, there's a small cemetery behind St. Michael's Church in Thornfield Village, about 5 miles from here. I'm buried there, in an unmarked grave at the north corner, under an old yew tree. No one has visited in decades. No one remembered me. I'll visit, I said. I'll remember. Thank you, Catherine whispered, and then with a final look at the approaching figure. Goodbye, Rebecca Clark. Live well. She stepped off the edge of the bridge, not falling as a human body would, but dispersing, the droplets that formed her shape separating, merging with the rain all around us. For a moment, I thought I heard a sigh of relief on the wind, a sound of long-awaited peace. The figure from the security van froze mid-step. A tremor seemed to pass through its unnaturally proportioned body. The blank face tilted upward, as if watching Catherine's watery form dissolve into the greater storm. Then, with a movement too quick for my eye to follow, it was directly in front of me. No face, no features, but somehow I could feel its rage, its frustration. It had been cheated of its prey. We stood there, the thing and I, as the rain continued to fall around us. A strange stillness settled over the bridge, a moment suspended between one heartbeat and the next. Then the figure began to change. Its blank face developed cracks, like porcelain shattering in slow motion. Its body seemed to fold in on itself, collapsing inward as if being compressed by an invisible force. There was no sound except the rain and the river below, but I had the distinct impression of a scream, a howl of thwarted hunger, of ancient appetite denied. In less than 30 seconds, it was gone. Not a trace remained, not even security van that had followed me from the city. I stood alone on Blackwood Bridge as the rain gradually lessened, then stopped altogether. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, the faintest hint of dawn breaking through the dissipating clouds. I walked back to my car on unsteady legs, half convinced the night's events had been some vivid hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. But deep down, I knew better. Catherine had been real. The faceless thing had been real. And my narrow escape had been real too. I never returned to work at the helpline. How could I, after experiencing firsthand the kind of terror and helplessness that so many of our callers described? Instead, I found a new purpose, researching the history of Blackwood Bridge, documenting the unusual number of suicides over the decades, looking for patterns that might indicate the presence of that nameless, faceless entity. And I visited Catherine's grave, just as I promised. The small cemetery behind St. Michael's was exactly as she described it. The unmarked grave easily identifiable under the ancient yew. I brought flowers, white lilies, and later arranged for a proper headstone. Catherine Marsh. It reads, "Remembered at last." On rainy nights like tonight, I sometimes think I hear the phone ringing, even when it isn't. I find myself listening for Catherine's voice and sound of water against glass, wondering if she found peace or if she's still out there somewhere, in whatever comes after this life. But mostly, I find myself watching the shadows and corners of my flat, studying the faces of security guards and night workers with perhaps too much attention to detail, making sure they have faces, real faces with eyes and noses and mouths. Because I know now that some things hide in plain sight. Some things wear human shapes like ill-fitting suits. And some things wait in the rain for us to reach our breaking point, to choose an ending that feeds their ancient, patient hunger. So if you're listening to this on a rainy night and your phone rings at an unexpected hour, think carefully before you answer. Listen for the sound of rain on the other end of the line. And if a voice, young but somehow weighted with age, asks for your help, remember Catherine Marsh. Remember that some calls are not meant to be answered. Some bridges are not meant to be crossed. And some fates, with courage and sacrifice, can be changed after all. The sound of rain against the windows usually brings me comfort. Most people find it soothing, don't they? The gentle patter, the rhythmic drumming, the white noise that blocks out the world's harsher sounds. A reminder that you're safe and dry while nature rages outside. But not anymore. Not since what happened last autumn in the small village of Thornwell. I'm a hydrologist. I study water systems for a living. Rivers, lakes, groundwater flows, drainage patterns. Most of my work involves computer models and data analysis, but occasionally I'm called to assess unusual situations in the field. Flooding events, contamination concerns, that sort of thing. It's rarely exciting work. Truth be told, until Thornwell. It began with an email from a local counselor requesting an expert opinion on what he described as anomalous rainfall patterns affecting their village. Thornwell sits in a valley between gentle hills and rural Derbyshire, the kind of picturesque stone-built settlement that appears on postcards and in Sunday supplement articles about the best places to retire. Population around 400, one pub, one church, one small primary school. Unremarkable in every way, except, according to Councillor Morgan's email for the rain. It's been raining here for 57 consecutive days, he wrote. Not constantly, but every day without fail. The meteorological office has no explanation. The surrounding areas have experienced normal autumn weather patterns. It's only Thornwell that remains under this persistent cloud. My curiosity was piqued. Microclimates are a real phenomenon, but they typically occur in areas with distinctive geographical features. Mountains, large bodies of water, urban heat islands. Thornwell had none of these. It was just an ordinary village in ordinary countryside. I agreed to visit, partly out of professional interest, partly because the autumn had been slow for consulting work. 2 days later, I was driving through the Derbyshire Dales, windscreen wipers fighting a losing battle against the increasingly heavy rain as I approached my destination. The transition was uncanny. One moment I was driving under scattered clouds with occasional sunlight breaking through. The next, I passed an invisible threshold and entered what looked like a different weather system entirely. Dark. Low-hanging clouds stretched as far as I could see ahead, while clear skies remained visible in my rear-view mirror. The rain intensified, falling in sheets that reduced visibility to mere meters. Thornwell emerged from the downpour gradually. First a church spire, then the clustered stone houses with their slate roofs, water streaming from every surface. I pulled into the small car park behind the village pub, Crown and Thistle, where I'd arranged to meet Councillor Morgan. Stepping out of my car was like stepping into a shower. I was soaked by the time I retrieved my equipment bag from the boot. Despite the umbrella I deployed, the rain here was different somehow, heavier, more insistent, almost aggressive in its intensity. The pub's interior was a welcome respite, warm, dry, with a fire crackling the stone hearth. It was just past noon, but the place was nearly full. Locals, I assumed, seeking refuge from the relentless downpour. They looked up as I entered, water dripping from my coat onto the worn wooden floor. Their gaze felt assessing, slightly wary. Not the usual curious welcome outsiders might receive in a village pub. Dr. Ainsworth? A man approached, hand extended. Late 50s, I guessed, with a weathered face and gray hair cut close to his scalp. Richard Morgan. Thank you for coming all this way. We settled at a corner table with pints of the local ale. Morgan explained the situation in more detail, while I took notes on my tablet. It started in early September, he said, voice low as a concern about being overheard. Just normal autumn rain at first, but it never stopped, day after day, sometimes easing to a drizzle, sometimes becoming a downpour, but never ceasing entirely. And it's only Thornwell. I clarified, the surrounding villages aren't affected? Morgan shook his head. The rain stopped precisely at the parish boundaries. Step across the line, and you're in different weather entirely. I've never seen anything like it. That's unusual, I admit it, an understatement. But I didn't want to seem dismissive. What about flooding? With this much continuous rainfall, I'd expect significant water management issues. That's the other strange thing, Morgan said, leaning forward. Despite the constant rain, we've had minimal flooding. The ground seems to absorb it somehow. The stream that runs to the village is higher than normal, but nothing like what you'd expect after nearly 2 months of daily rain. My scientific curiosity was now fully engaged. This wasn't just a microclimate anomaly. It was a hydrological impossibility. The ground should have been saturated weeks ago, unable to absorb more water, leading to significant surface runoff and flooding. I'd like to take some measurements, I said. Soil samples, stream flow rates, rain gauges at various points around the village. And I'll need to see any historical data you have. Rainfall records, geological surveys, that sort of thing. Morgan nodded, but there was something in his expression, a flicker of hesitation, perhaps even fear. Of course, whatever you need. But, Dr. Ainsworth, there's something else. Something I didn't mention in my email because, well, it sounds mad. I waited, pen poised over my tablet. People are changing, he said finally. Behavioral changes at first, mood swings, memory lapses, unusual fixations. But lately, there have been physical changes too. Skin conditions primarily, rashes, lesions that won't heal properly. And everyone's constantly thirsty, despite being surrounded by water. I frowned. That sounds medical rather than hydrological. Have you consulted health authorities? We have. They found nothing conclusive. No waterborne pathogens. No environmental toxins. They suggested stress. Perhaps a mass psychogenic illness triggered by the unusual weather. His tone made it clear what he thought of that explanation. And you think it's connected to the rain somehow? Morgan took a long sip of his ale before answering. I think there's something in the rain. Something that wasn't there before. My scientific mind immediately began cataloging possibilities. Chemical contamination, microplastics, algal toxins carried on the wind. All unlikely in this isolated location, but not impossible. I'll need water samples as well then, I said, both rainwater and from their local supply. Morgan seemed relieved by my pragmatic response. Thank you. I knew I'd sound like a conspiracy theorist, but you'll understand when you've been here a few days. We finished our drinks, and Morgan showed me my accommodation. A small room above the pub, simply furnished but comfortable enough. I spent the afternoon setting up monitoring equipment around the village. Rain gauges, soil moisture sensors, sample containers for collecting rainwater. The locals watched me work with that same wary assessment I'd noticed in the pub. No one approached or questioned me, but I felt constantly observed. By evening, I was soaked through despite my waterproof clothing. The rain had a peculiar quality to it, slightly viscous, almost oily on the skin. It didn't behave quite like normal rainwater, clinging to surfaces rather than running off cleanly. I made a note to examine it under a microscope at the earliest opportunity. I returned to the pub for dinner, finding it even more crowded than at lunchtime. The atmosphere had changed, though, where earlier there had been quiet conversation and the occasional burst of laughter. Now there was an almost reverent silence. The locals sat in groups, nursing drinks, their attention focused on the sound of rain hammering against the windows. The landlord, a heavy-set man with ruddy cheeks, served me a plate of hearty stew, but volunteered no conversation beyond the essential. When I attempted small talk about the unusual weather, he simply nodded and moved away, as if reluctant to discuss it after dinner. I retreated to my room to review the data I'd gathered. The rainfall measurements were extraordinary. Over 40 millimeters in just 6 hours, enough to trigger flood warnings in most areas. Yet, as Morgan had said, the village showed minimal signs of flooding. The preliminary soil samples I'd taken were saturated as expected, but not to the degree they should have been given the reported duration of rainfall. Most curious of all were the rainwater samples. Even to the naked eye, there was something off about them. The water had a faint bluish tinge and a subtle iridescence when light struck it at certain angles, lacking proper laboratory equipment. I couldn't perform a detailed analysis, but I took photographs and measurements for later examination. I was making notes when a knock at my door startled me. It was late, past closing time for Pub Below. I opened the door cautiously to find a young woman standing in the dimly lit corridor. She was perhaps in her mid-20s, pale and thin, with dark hair plastered to her scalp by the rain. Her clothes were soaked through, water pooling around her feet on the wooden floorboards. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you the scientist? The one studying the rain?" I nodded, momentarily taken aback by her appearance at this hour. "Dr. Mia Ainsworth, yes. I'm a hydrologist. My name is Emma Walsh. I need to show you something. Something about the rain. But not here. Too many people might see us talking." My professional caution warred with scientific curiosity. This young woman was clearly distressed, possibly unwell, given what Morgan had said about the villagers' health. But she might also have valuable information. "It's quite late," I said carefully. "Perhaps we could meet tomorrow, somewhere public." Emma shook her head urgently. "No, it has to be now. And I can't be seen talking to you in public. They're watching. They're always watching." Her eyes darted nervously toward the staircase. "Please, it's important." Against my better judgment, I agreed. "Let me get my coat." We slipped out through the pub's back entrance. The rain continued unabated, falling from the sky, so dark it seemed more like midnight than early evening. Emma led me through narrow lanes between stone cottages, occasionally glancing back to ensure I was following. Few lights showed in the windows we passed, though it wasn't yet 10 p.m. "Where are we going?" I asked, raising my voice to be heard over the drumming rain. "The old well," she replied without turning. "In the woods just outside the village. It's where it started." Where what started? She didn't answer, just increased her pace, leading me beyond the last row of houses and onto a muddy track that disappeared into a stand of ancient oaks. I switched on my torch, the beam cutting through rain and darkness to illuminate a narrow path winding between gnarled trunks. The woodland should have provided some shelter from the downpour, but if anything, the rain seemed even heavier beneath the canopy, dripping from leaves and branches in fat, irregular drops that found their way inside my collar despite my hood. It didn't feel like natural rainfall anymore. It felt targeted, almost deliberate in the way it seemed to seek exposed skin. We'd walked perhaps 10 minutes when Emma stopped. We'd reached a small clearing, and in its center stood the well she'd mentioned. It was older and more elaborate than I'd expected. A stone structure about waist-high, with ornate carvings decorating its circular wall, and a wooden roof supported by 4 posts. It looked ancient, possibly medieval, its stones worn smooth by centuries of weather. Emma approached it with visible trepidation, her body language suggesting she both feared and revered the structure. "This is the Thornwell," she said, "where the village got its name. It's been here longer than the village itself. Saxon times, possibly earlier." I moved closer, directing my torch beam into the well's depths. Instead of the dark circle I expected, the light reflected off water that was much higher than it should have been, nearly to the top of the well. "That's unusual," I commented. "The water table shouldn't be this high, even with all the rain." "It's rising," Emma said. "Every day it rises a little more. Soon it will overflow, and when it does..." She trailed off, hugging herself as if suddenly cold. "When it does, what?" I prompted, instead of answering directly. She pointed to the carvings on the well's exterior. "Have you noticed the pattern? What they depict?" I examined the stonework more carefully. The carvings were weathered but still discernible. Stylized figures that appear to be human, but with unusual proportions. Elongated limbs, oversized heads, webbed hands and feet. They formed a continuous band around the well, and seemed to be engaged in some kind of ritual or ceremony. "They're not human," Emma said, watching my face as understanding dawned. "The old stories call them the Waterfolk. People who lived here before humans came. People who went into the water and changed." A chill that had nothing to do with the rain ran through me. "Miss Walsh, these are just carvings. Folk tales." "They don't." "I've seen them," she interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce. "In the rain, in puddles, in my bathroom mirror, when it fogs up after a shower. Watching, always watching." I took a step back, reassessing the situation. The young woman was clearly experiencing some kind of delusion, perhaps related to the psychological symptoms Morgan had mentioned. "Emma, I think you should let me walk you home," I said gently. "It's late and you're soaked through. We can talk more about this tomorrow." "You don't believe me." "It wasn't a question. I thought you might be different. A scientist. Someone who looks for evidence, for truth." She turned toward the well, placing her hands on its stone rim. "I'll show you then." Before I could stop her, she leaned over the well and plunged her hands into the water. I lunged forward to grab her, fearing she might throw herself in, but she merely remained in that position, arms submerged to the elbows, head bowed as if in prayer or supplication. "Emma, stop. That water could be contaminated." I tried to pull her back, but she resisted with surprising strength. "Listen," she whispered. "Listen to the rain." Despite myself, I paused. The rainfall had changed. What had been a constant, formless drumming was now rhythmic, almost musical. It fell in patterns, in sequences that seemed almost deliberate, like a language I couldn't quite understand, but could recognize as communication. "What?" I began, but Emma cut me off. "They're speaking, the Waterfolk. They speak through the rain, through running water, through anything that flows." Her voice had taken on a dreamy, distant quality. "They've always been here, dormant, waiting, but now they're waking up, calling to us." As she spoke, the water in the well began to move. Not ripples from Emma's submerged arms, but a deliberate swirling motion, like a slow whirlpool. And within that motion, I saw something that defied rational explanation. Shapes forming and dissolving. Faces that were almost human but distorted, elongated, with two large eyes and lips that stretched impossibly wide. I stumbled backward, dropping my torch in shock. It rolled away, its beam illuminating the ground around the well. The mud was moving too, pulsing and shifting as if something beneath it was trying to break through. "Emma, we need to leave. Now!" I grabbed her arm, trying to pull her away from the well. She resisted, keeping her hands in the swirling water. "It's too late," she said, turning to look at me with an expression of eerie calm. "They're already here. In the rain, in the ground, in us." She pushed back her wet hair to reveal what I'd taken for rainwater on her neck. It was actually a series of slits. Not wounds, but structures that looked horribly like nascent gills. I recoiled in horror, my scientific mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. People didn't develop gills. Water didn't form faces. Rain didn't speak. Yet I couldn't deny the evidence of my senses. The rhythmic rainfall had intensified, drumming against leaves and earth in complex patterns that sounded increasingly like words in a language I almost recognized. The mud around the well was definitely moving, forming into shapes that resembled hands reaching upward. And Emma's neck. Those weren't prosthetics or makeup. They were real, opening and closing slightly as she breathed. "What's happening to you?" I whispered. "Evolution," she replied with that same unsettling calm. "Adaptation. The water is changing us, preparing us for the rising, for the return." "Return of what?" Emma smiled, and I noticed for the first time that her teeth seemed different, more numerous, needle-like. "The old ones, the first ones. The water folk who ruled here before the land rose and drove them deep. They've been waiting, sleeping in the dark waters beneath. But now the cycle turns again. The waters are rising, and we will rise with them." As she spoke, the rain intensified impossibly, coming down in solid sheets that made it difficult to breathe, to see. The clearing was flooding rapidly, water swirling around our ankles, then our calves. But it wasn't flowing away as water should. It was gathering, pooling, as if drawn to the specific location against the laws of gravity. With shocking suddenness, Emma released her grip on the well and grabbed my wrist. Her touch was ice cold, her fingers strangely rigid and rough-textured, like scales. "Join us," she urged. "Put your hands in the well. Accept the gift of the water. It's painless, I promise. Just a brief discomfort as you change, and then clarity like you've never known." I wrenched my arm free and backed away, slipping in the mud, falling. The water around me was no longer clear, but tinged with that same bluish iridescence I'd noticed in my samples, glowing faintly in the darkness. And in that glow, I could see that the mud wasn't mud at all. It was a writhing mass of small, elongated forms, like tadpoles but with rudimentary limbs and oversized heads. Larvae, infant forms of whatever Emma was becoming. Pure survival instinct took over. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not caring about direction, just away from the well, away from Emma, away from the impossible horror of what I'd witnessed. I could hear her calling after me, her voice changing, becoming something liquid and inhuman that seemed to merge with the sound of the rain. I ran blindly through the dark woods, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The rain pursued me, growing heavier, more insistent, falling in patterns that now distinctly sounded like words. Join us. Change. Evolve. Return. Somehow I found the path back to the village, emerging from the woods to see Thornwell spread below me in the darkness and rain. It looked different. The layout of streets and buildings forming a pattern I hadn't noticed before. A sigil, a symbol, centered on the village green where an ornamental fountain stood. Another wellspring. Another entrance point for whatever was rising from below. I didn't go back to the pub. Couldn't face the thought of being trapped there, surrounded by villagers who might all be like Emma, changing, evolving into something inhuman. Instead, I staggered to my car, fumbling with keys in trembling hands, desperate to escape. The engine started on the first try, a small mercy. I reversed out of the parking space and accelerated away, headlights cutting through the torrential rain. As I reached the edge of the village, I glanced in my rear-view mirror and saw figures standing in the road behind me, dozens of them, motionless in the downpour, watching my departure. I drove recklessly, too fast for the conditions, my only thought to put as much distance as possible between myself and Thornwell. The rain ceased abruptly as I crossed the invisible boundary, the night sky clearing to reveal stars and a waxing moon. I kept driving until I reached a service station on the main road, where I stopped, hands shaking too badly to continue. I never filed a report about Thornwell. What could I possibly say? That the village was experiencing a localized weather anomaly that was transforming its inhabitants into aquatic hybrids? That an ancient race of water-dwelling beings was rising from below, using the rain as a vector for changing human physiology? I have been dismissed as delusional, possibly sectioned under the Mental Health Act. Instead, I took a leave of absence from work, citing stress and exhaustion. I moved inland, as far from large bodies of water as I could manage in this island nation. I installed water filters on every tap in my new home. I checked the weather forecast obsessively, canceling plans if there's even a slight chance of rain. Most importantly, I watched the news for reports about Thornwell. There have been surprisingly few. A brief mention of unusual flooding in Derbyshire last winter. A small item about a village being temporarily evacuated due to waterlogged ground, making structures unstable. Nothing since. I considered going back, attempting to gather evidence, to prove what I saw. But each time I contemplate it, the rain begins to fall wherever I am. Even on clear days when no precipitation is forecast, just around me, just enough to send a message. They're watching, they know, and they can reach me anywhere water falls from the sky. So I live with my fear, my knowledge of what's coming. Because the rain in Thornwell was just the beginning. The well springs are numerous, scattered across the country, across the world. Ancient access points to whatever dwells in the deep waters beneath. And as sea levels rise, as our climate changes, more of those points will activate, spreading the transformation. It's raining now as I tell you this. Listen to it, tapping against your window. Is it random, that pattern? Or can you hear, as I now can, the subtle rhythm of communication? The almost words forming in the white noise? They're speaking to you, calling you, inviting you to join them in the glorious evolution to come. Whatever you do, don't listen. Don't let the rain touch your skin if you can avoid it. And never, ever drink water you haven't tested first, because they're patient, the water folk. They've waited thousands of years for the cycle to turn again, for the waters to rise. They can wait a little longer for each of us to join them, one by one, willing or not. The rain is getting heavier now. Can you hear them calling your name? The rain makes a gentle tapping against my window tonight, a sound that once brought me comfort. I used to love rainy days. The perfect excuse to stay inside with a good book and a cup of tea, watching droplets trace irregular patterns down the glass while the world outside turned gray and soft-edged. That was before I found the photograph, before the rain became something to fear. I'm an antiques dealer by trade, specializing in vintage photography and ephemera. It's a niche market, but a rewarding one. There's something magical about holding a tangible piece of the past in your hands. A moment captured forever. Faces looking out at you across decades or even centuries. The photograph came into my possession 3 months ago at an estate auction in a small village about 40 miles from London. The deceased had been a collector of sorts, though not a particularly discerning one. His house was crammed with items ranging from valuable antiques to worthless bric-a-brac, all jumbled together without rhyme or reason. I almost didn't attend the auction. The catalog was unimpressive, and the forecast predicted heavy rain, the tail end of an autumn storm that had been sweeping across Britain for days. But a colleague mentioned seeing some interesting photographic items when he'd viewed the lot, so I made the drive despite my misgivings. The rain was torrential by the time I arrived, water coursing down the village's narrow streets and collecting in deep puddles. I parked as close to the auction house as possible, but still got soaked in the short dash from car to entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was damp and close. The small room packed with local bargain hunters and a few dealers I recognized. The items were arranged on tables around the perimeter, with the more valuable pieces in glass display cases. I made my way around methodically, noting a few potential purchases. A collection of Victorian car taste of Visite in good condition, a folding Kodak camera from the 1920s, some interesting photographic postcards from the First World War. It was in a box of miscellaneous paper ephemera that I found the photograph. Nothing about it immediately stood out. An 8x10 black and white print, probably from the 1950s based on the paper stock and the style. It showed a rain-soaked street in what appeared to be a small town or village. Victorian buildings lined both sides, their details slightly blurred by the downpour. A solitary figure stood in the middle distance, back to the camera, umbrella raised against the deluge. I almost set it aside. It was a competent shot, but not particularly remarkable, the kind of atmospheric study any keen amateur might have taken. But something made me look closer, and that's when I noticed the anomaly. The rain in the photograph was falling upward. I blinked, certain I was mistaken. But no, looking carefully at the image, the raindrops were clearly moving from ground to sky, defying gravity and common sense. It was subtle enough that you wouldn't notice at casual glance, but once seen, impossible to unsee. My first thought was that the negative had been printed backwards, but that wouldn't explain the inverted rain. It would affect the entire image symmetrically. This was something else entirely. A photographic trick, a double exposure, or simply an optical illusion created by the angle of the camera and the light. Intrigued, I added the photograph to my pile of purchases. The box of ephemera went for a reasonable price, probably because no one else had spotted the peculiarity of that one image. By the time the auction ended, the rain outside had intensified further, turning the streets into shallow rivers. I made another dash to my car, clutching my acquisition protectively inside my coat. The drive home was nerve-wracking, visibility reduced to just a few meters ahead. The windscreen wipers struggling to keep pace with the deluge. Several times I considered pulling over to wait out the worst of the storm, but each time I convinced myself to continue. I had a strange, urgent desire to get home and examine the photograph more closely. It was nearly 10 p.m. by the time I arrived back at my flat in South London. I was exhausted and rain-sodden, but instead of heading straight for a hot shower as I'd normally do, I found myself carefully unpacking my purchases, setting aside everything except the strange photograph under the bright light of my desk lamp. The image revealed new details. The solitary figure with the umbrella was more distinct now. A man in a dark overcoat, his posture stiff and formal. The buildings lining the street bore shop signs, though most were unreadable due to rain blurring the image. And the rain itself, yes, definitely falling upward. Each drop elongated slightly as it rose from ground to sky. There was something else, too, something I hadn't noticed at the auction. In the darkened doorway of one of the shops, partially obscured by shadow, stood a second figure. Unlike the man with the umbrella, this figure was facing the camera. Though its features were indistinct, I had the uncomfortable impression It was staring directly at the photographer, directly at me. A sudden gust of wind rattled my windows, making me jump. Outside, the rain continued unabated, sheets of water streaming down the glass. For a brief, irrational moment, I found myself staring at the raindrops, checking their direction of travel. Normal, of course, downward, as rain should be. I turned my attention back to the photograph, studying it for any clue to its origin. There was nothing written on the back, no photographer's stamp or development date. The paper was slightly yellow with age, but otherwise in good condition. A completely unremarkable vintage photograph, save for its impossible content. Fatigue finally overcame curiosity, and I carefully placed the photograph in a protective sleeve before heading to bed. That night, I dreamt of rain, not the gentle patter against windows that I usually found so soothing, but a heavier, more insistent deluge. In the dream, I was standing on an unfamiliar street, buildings looming on either side, while rain fell upward around me, streaking from puddles toward a dark, boiling sky. And somewhere behind me, footsteps approached, measured and deliberate, drawing closer with each passing moment. I woke to find my bedroom filled with the gray light of a rainy dawn. For several seconds, I lay disoriented, the dream still clinging to me like cobwebs. Then reality reasserted itself, and I remembered the photograph. Over the next few days, I found myself increasingly preoccupied with the image. I showed it to several colleagues, experts in photographic techniques and restoration. None could explain the inverted rain. One suggested it might be an elaborate hoax, perhaps created for a magazine article or advertisement. Another proposed that the photograph had captured some rare meteorological phenomenon, a strong updraft perhaps, or an unusual effect created by wind patterns between the buildings. None of these explanations satisfied me. There was something about the image that felt wrong on a fundamental level, as if it depicted not just an impossible physical event, but a moment where reality itself had somehow slipped. My obsession grew. I began researching cases of photographic anomalies, of images that captured things which couldn't exist. The literature was vast but of varying credibility, ranging from serious academic investigations of photographic mysteries to lurid tales of ghost photography and other paranormal claims. One evening, about a week after the auction, I was scanning an online forum dedicated to unexplained photographs when a comment caught my eye. A user had posted about a collection of photographs showing reversed natural phenomena, waterfalls flowing upward, smoke descending rather than rising, and most relevantly, rain falling the wrong direction. According to this person, such images were incredibly rare and potentially dangerous. They show places where the boundary is thin, the comment read, where our world and the other side bleed into each other. If you look at them too long, you might start to see through. It was a kind of pseudo-mystical nonsense I would normally dismiss outright, but something about it resonated with the unease I'd been feeling. I sent the user a private message, describing the photograph I found and asking for more information. The response came surprisingly quickly. Get rid of it. Burn it if you can. Do not look at it anymore, especially not when it's raining. I almost laughed. It seemed so melodramatic, so absurdly superstitious. And yet, I found myself glancing toward the window, where rain was once again streaming down the glass. It had been raining on and off ever since the auction, ever since the photograph had come into my possession. Coincidence, obviously. October in England, rain was hardly unusual. I replied, asking for a more specific explanation. What exactly did they think the photograph showed? Why the warning about rain? Hours passed with no response. Eventually, I gave up waiting and went to bed, the photograph safely stored in a protective sleeve in a drawer of my desk. That night, the dream returned. The unfamiliar street, the upward falling rain, the approaching footsteps that never quite reached me before I woke. Morning brought another gray, rainy day and a reply to my message. It was brief but disturbing. Your photograph shows a moment of reversal, a place where the normal laws of nature are suspended, where things flow backward. The figure with the umbrella has passed through from the other side. The one in the doorway is halfway through. If you keep looking at the image, especially during rain, which thins the boundary between worlds, you'll start to see them more clearly, and they'll start to see you. I close the message with a mixture of amusement and unease. It was clearly the ramblings of someone with an overactive imagination, or perhaps mental health issues. And yet, I found myself remembering the shadowy figure in the doorway, the sense that it was looking directly at me, against my better judgment. I retrieved the photograph from its drawer. In the gray morning light, it seemed more ominous somehow, the street darker, the rain more pronounced in its impossible upward trajectory. I studied the man with the umbrella, noting details I hadn't seen before. His stance was unnatural, too rigid even for a formal 1950s portrait, and his umbrella. Now that I looked more carefully, it wasn't open against the rain but closed, pointed downward toward the ground, or upward. If everything in the image was truly reversed, my gaze shifted to the figure in the doorway. In the murky morning light, its features seemed slightly clearer than before, or perhaps my eyes were simply adjusting, finding patterns in the shadows. It appeared to be wearing dark clothing similar to the umbrella man's, but its proportions were somehow off. Too tall, too thin, its head slightly too large for its body. And its face, there was definitely a face now, where before there had been only shadow. A pale oval with dark indentations where eyes should be, and a horizontal line that might have been a mouth. A sudden, sharp rapping against my window made me jerk in surprise. The photograph slipping from my fingers to the floor, just the wind driving rain against the glass. I told myself, nothing more. But when I bent to retrieve the photograph, I noticed something that sent a chill through me. The fallen image lay face up on the floor, and from this new angle, the figure in the doorway seemed to have shifted slightly. Its head was now turned more directly toward the viewer, toward me, and what I had taken for a mouth was now clearly a smile, a wide, unsettling smile that stretched too far across its face. I snatched up the photograph and shoved it back into a protective sleeve, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, of the different angle. Photographs don't change. They can't. The rain intensified as the day progressed, beating against my windows with an insistence that made concentration impossible. I tried to work. I had other items from the auction to catalog and list for sale, but my mind kept returning to the photograph and the strange warning from a forum user. By evening, my nerves were frayed. The constant sound of rain, coupled with my lack of sleep and growing obsession with the photograph, had left me on edge. I decided that some company might help restore my perspective, so I called a friend who lived nearby and invited her over for dinner. Claire arrived around 7, bringing a bottle of wine and welcome conversation that had nothing to do with impossible photographs or upward falling rain. We had a pleasant meal, and I deliberately steered our talk toward normal, everyday topics. It wasn't until we'd moved to the sofa with a second glass of wine that she noticed my distraction. "You seem a bit off tonight," she said. "Is everything all right?" I hesitated, torn between wanting to confide in someone and fear of sounding ridiculous. Claire was pragmatic, level-headed. Exactly the kind of person who might help me see how foolish my growing obsession was. But explaining it would mean showing her the photograph. "I found something strange at an auction last week," I said finally. "A photograph that's been bothering me. It's probably nothing, just a clever photographic trick. But show me," she suggested. 2 pairs of eyes are better than one. Reluctantly, I retrieved the photograph from my desk drawer. As I handed it to her, I felt a strange reluctance to let it go, as if the image had somehow become a part of me. Claire studied it carefully, her expression shifting from casual interest to puzzlement. "The rain's falling up," she said after a moment. "That's odd. Some kind of double exposure, maybe." That's what I thought at first. But look at the figure in the doorway on the right side of the street. She squinted, tilting the photograph toward the lamp. It's pretty shadowy, but yes, I see someone standing there. What about it? Does it look like it's looking at you? Claire glanced up at me, one eyebrow raised. Not really. It's too indistinct to tell which way it's facing. She handed the photograph back. It's an interesting curiosity, but I don't see why it's bothering you so much. I felt simultaneously relieved and disappointed. Relieved that Claire hadn't seen the disturbing details that had been preoccupying me, suggesting they might indeed be products of my imagination. Disappointed because part of me had hoped for validation, for confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. "You're probably right," I conceded, slipping the photograph back into its sleeve. "I've been working too hard lately, not getting enough sleep." Claire stayed for another hour, and by the time she left, I felt considerably calmer. The rain had eased to a gentle patter, and I decided to have a hot bath before bed, hoping it would help me relax further. As I soaked in the steaming water, I could hear the rain resuming its intensity, drumming against the bathroom window. The sound was almost hypnotic, and I found my mind drifting, returned to the photograph despite my best efforts to think of other things. The upward falling rain, the rigid figure with the closed umbrella, the watching presence in the doorway, with its too wide smile. A sudden, sharp crack jolted me fully awake, the sound of something hard striking glass. I sat up, water sloshing over the edge of the tub, heart pounding in my chest. It had sounded like someone tapping on the bathroom window, but that was impossible. My flat was on the 3rd floor, with no balcony or accessible ledge outside the bathroom. I listened intently, but heard nothing beyond the steady patter of rain. Just the wind, I told myself, a branch or debris carried by the storm. I finished my bath quickly and toweled off, suddenly eager to be dressed and out of the vulnerable state of undress. As I was hanging my towel to dry, I noticed something that made my breath catch in my throat. The steam from the hot bath had fogged the bathroom mirror, and in that condensation, a pattern had formed. Not the random drips and streaks that would occur naturally, but what appeared to be words, as if a finger had traced through the foggy surface. Looking through, I backed away, telling myself it was a coincidence. Just random condensation patterns that my anxious mind was interpreting as words. But even as I tried to rationalize it, the bathroom light flickered once, twice, and went out, plunging me into darkness except for the faint glow coming from the hallway. I fumbled for the door handle, an irrational fear gripping me. The fear that if I couldn't find it quickly enough, something else would find me first. Something that had been watching from a doorway in a rain-soaked photograph. My fingers closed around the handle at last, and I practically fell into the hallway, pulling the bathroom door firmly shut behind me, as if to contain whatever presence I'd sense inside. In the better light of the hall, my fear began to seem foolish, a power fluctuation, causing the bathroom light to fail. Steam on a mirror forming random patterns that my stressed mind had interpreted as words. I was overreacting, letting my obsession with the photograph affect my perception of ordinary events. I got dressed in my bedroom, deliberately focusing on mundane details. The feel of cotton against my skin, the ticking of the bedside clock, the familiar view from my window of the street below, illuminated by regularly spaced street lamps. A view that now included a solitary figure standing directly beneath the lamp opposite my building, motionless in the pouring rain. A figure holding what appeared to be a closed umbrella, pointed toward the ground. For several seconds, I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. It was a coincidence. It had to be just a pedestrian caught in the rain, perhaps waiting for someone. The closed umbrella was unusual, but not impossible to explain. Maybe it was broken, or maybe the figure had just lowered it for some reason. As if sensing my gaze, the figure slowly raised its head, looking directly up at my window. Even from this distance, even through the rain and darkness, I could see that its face was wrong somehow. Too pale, too smooth, with features that seemed to shift and blur like something underwater. I stumbled back from the window, heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't possible. The photograph was just an image, a moment captured in the past. It couldn't be connected to a figure on my street in the present, unless the forum user had been right. Unless the photograph really did show a place where the boundary between worlds was thin, a place where things could come through. I forced myself to approach the window again, to look down at the street below. The figure was gone. The space beneath the street lamp was empty, rain falling to the circle of light uninterrupted. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by doubt. Had I imagined it? Was my obsession with the photograph causing me to hallucinate? I needed to get rid of the photograph. Whatever it was, an elaborate hoax, a rare photographic anomaly, or something more sinister. It was affecting my mental state in ways I couldn't afford to ignore. But first, I needed to look at it one more time, to reassure myself that it was just an image, nothing more, that the figures in it were fixed, unchanging, as photographs should be. The protective sleeve was where I'd left it, on the small table beside the sofa. I picked it up, steeling myself before removing the photograph and holding it under the bright light of the floor lamp. The street was the same, the rain still falling impossibly upward. The figure with the umbrella stood in the same position, rigid and formal in its dark overcoat. But the doorway on the right side of the street was empty. The shadowy figure that had been standing there, watching, was gone. My hands began to shake, the photograph trembling in my grasp. This wasn't possible. Photographs don't change. The figures in them don't move. A sudden, loud knock at my front door made me cry out in shock, the photograph slipping from my fingers to the floor. I stood paralyzed, staring at the door. It was nearly midnight. I wasn't expecting anyone. Claire would have texted before returning, and no one else would visit this late without calling first. Another knock, firmer this time, decisive. The sound of someone who knew I was home and expected me to answer. Who is it? I called, hating the tremor in my voice. No answer, just another knock. 3 sharp raps in rapid succession. I approached the door cautiously, every instinct screaming at me not to open it. I can't open the door unless you identify yourself, I said, louder this time. Silence. Then, just as I was beginning to hope whoever it was had gone away, a voice came from the other side of the door, a voice that was almost, but not quite human, too fluid, as if the words were being formed by someone who had only a theoretical understanding of how speech worked. I came from the rain, it said, from the place in your picture. I came through to see you, because you saw me. Ice seemed to flood my veins. I backed away from the door, unable to speak, unable to think coherently. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. Let me in. The voice continued, its tone conversational despite its strange, liquid quality. I've come such a long way. Through the rain, through the in-between places, just to meet you. Go away, I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. A sound came from the other side of the door. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, but something in between. You invited me, the voice said, when you looked too long at the photograph, when you saw me looking back. That's how it works. That's how we come through. I glanced down at the photograph on the floor, and what I saw drove the breath from my lungs. The image had changed again. The street was darker now, the rain heavier, and the figure with the umbrella had moved. It was closer to the foreground, as if it had walked toward the camera, toward me, and it was looking over its shoulder back at the viewer. Its face was visible now, a face that matched the voice beyond my door. Not quite human, features fluid and indistinct, like something viewed through moving water. But the smile, that was clear enough, wide and somehow wrong, stretching too far across what should have been a face. Another knock at the door, harder this time, rattling the frame. "Let me in," the voice insisted. No longer conversational, but demanding, or I'll find another way through. The rain makes the way easy, and it's raining harder now. Can't you hear it? The rain did indeed seem to be intensifying, hammering against the windows with a fury that felt almost sentient. And within that sound, I could hear something else, a rhythm, a pattern, like words being formed in a language I almost understood. The same language as the voice beyond my door. Desperation drove me to action. I lunged to the photograph, snatching it from the floor. If this object was somehow a gateway, a thinning in the boundary between worlds, then destroying it might close that gateway. I ran to the kitchen, the pounding on my front door growing louder, more insistent. The wood was beginning to splinter around the lock, as if whatever was outside was using more than human strength now. With shaking hands, I turned on the gas stove, holding the photograph over the blue flame. The paper resisted at first, then began to smoke and curl at the edges. A smell filled the kitchen, not just the expected scent of burning paper, but something else, something damp and organic, like wet earth or stagnant water. The pounding at the door stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, I could hear something else, a sound from the bathroom, the tap turning on, water beginning to flow. I hadn't left the tap running. The photograph was burning properly now, the flame consuming the image from the outside in. As the fire reached the figure with the umbrella, I heard a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. A high, thin scream, not quite human, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The taps in the bathroom turned on full force, water thundering into the sink and bathtub. And the rain seemed to respond to the scream, lashing against the windows with such violence I feared the glass might shatter. Water began to seep under my front door, not from any natural source, but as if the rain outside had decided to ignore the laws of physics, to flow upward and inward, seeking entry to my flat. The photograph was nearly consumed now, just a corner remaining unburned in my trembling fingers. I dropped it into the sink as the flame reached my skin, watching as the last of the image disappeared into ash. The screaming stopped. The water seeping under my door receded. The taps in the bathroom shut off with an audible clunk. And outside, the rain eased, becoming once again the gentle patter of an ordinary autumn storm. Even as he spoke, I noticed movement on the lower rocks of the island. Figures were emerging from the surging tide, climbing with jerky, unnatural movements toward the lighthouse. Human figures, or what had once been human. Their flesh was bloated, pale, sloughing off in places to reveal bone, or the scuttling forms of crabs that had made homes in their cavities. Their eyes were uniformly gone, replaced by empty sockets where small fish darted and wriggled. They came for me during a storm much like this one. Aldridge said, 40 years ago today, I tried to hide, to barricade myself in the lamp room, but there's no hiding from them. Not really. They smell the living, the warm blood, the breath and lungs that have never tasted salt water. The walking corpses had reached the lighthouse entrance now. I could hear them below, a wet slapping sound as they ascended the spiral staircase toward the lamp room. Why are you showing me this? I demanded, panic finally breaking through the dreamlike state that had enveloped me. Why did you lure me up here? Aldridge's ghost turned to me, his expression sorrowful. I had no choice. The Deep One must have its sacrifice. One soul every 40 years. That's the bargain struck centuries ago by the men who built this lighthouse. A lighthouse keeper. That was a traditional offering. But there are no more keepers now. I backed away toward the door. So you tricked me, brought me here to die in your place. Not in my place. Aldridge corrected. I already paid my price. But someone must. If the Deep One doesn't receive its due, it will rage unchecked. The storm will grow until it devours the Scottish coast, drowning thousands. One life against many. That's the calculation I made 40 years ago, when I threw myself from this room into its maw. The doorway behind me filled with the first of the drowned servants, water cascading from its ruined form, small crustaceans dropping from its clothing to skitter across the floor. More crowded behind it. A procession of waterlogged corpses in various states of decay. Some were relatively fresh. Perhaps sailors from recent wrecks. Others were ancient, little more than animated skeletons held together by scraps of rotted flesh and seaweed. There's no escape, Aldridge said, almost gently. I'm sorry, truly, but the cycle must continue. I clutched the pocket watch in my hand, feeling its cold metal bite into my palm. The watch that had drawn me into this nightmare. Why the watch? I asked, playing for time as I desperately searched for a way out. Why show it to me now? The watch is a beacon, Aldridge replied. A focus for what remains of my consciousness. I've tried to warn others before you, but they never found it. You were the first. I hoped I might save you. But the Deep One's call is too strong. Its hunger too great. The drowned figures were closing around me now, their ruined hands reaching, their mouths opening and closing in a parody of speech, seawater dribbling from blackened lips. There must be another way, I insisted. There's always another way. For a moment, Aldridge's ghost seemed to consider this, his fluid form rippling with indecision. Then, almost reluctantly, he nodded toward the pocket watch in my hand. The watch, he said. It's a beacon, but it's also a key, a tether to the physical world. If I had it when they came for me, but I didn't. I lost it days before, and without it, I had no defense against them. I looked down at the antique timepiece. How'd I use it? Aldridge's form was becoming less distinct, as if he were dissolving back into the storm that raged outside. Wind it, he said, his voice fading. Wind it and speak the keeper's oath. The words are inscribed inside the case. I fumbled with the watch, opening it again. Sure enough, inside the case was a tiny engraving. Words in a circular pattern too small to read in the dim light. I held it closer to my eyes, struggling to make out the archaic script as the drowned ones drew ever nearer. Hurry! Aldridge's ghost urged, now barely visible. They cannot be held at bay much longer. I found the winding mechanism on the watch and turned it, feeling the spring tighten beneath my fingers. As I did so, the hands began to move, spinning rapidly backward, the ticking growing louder until it seemed to fill the lamp room, drowning out even the howl of the storm. The closest of the drowned servants paused, its ruined head tilting as if confused by the sound. I seized a moment to read the inscription aloud, my voice stumbling over the unfamiliar words. I stand between the sea and the land, between the storm and safe harbor. By light I guide, by oath I bind, by sacrifice I seal. What was lost shall be found, what was taken shall be returned, what was broken shall be mended. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The pocket watch grew hot in my hand, painfully so, but I dared not drop it. The ticking accelerated to an impossible speed, the hands blurring into a continuous circle of motion. Around me, the drowned servant began to shriek, a terrible, gargling sound like the last desperate gasps of drowning victims. Outside, the massive form of the Deep One contorted, its fluid shape writhing as if in pain. The storm redoubled its fury. the glass panels of the lamp room rattling in their frames, threatening to shatter under the onslaught. Aldridge's ghost had completely vanished, but his voice remained a whisper beneath the cacophony. The watch remembers. The watch knows what was lost, what was taken, what was broken. The drowned servants were retreating now, backing away down the spiral staircase in the confusion of decaying limbs and dripping seawater. Through the windows, I saw the deep one beginning to sink back beneath the waves, its vast form diminishing as it retreated to the ocean depths. The watch in my hand gave one final, violent tick, then went silent. The hand stopped at 3:47, the same time it had shown when I first found it. But the second hand, which had been frozen, began to move again, resuming its steady march around the dial. And suddenly I understood. 3:47, the time of Aldridge's death 40 years ago. The moment the cycle began and the moment it could end. The storm subsided as rapidly as it formed, the howling wind dying to a whisper, the rain reducing to a gentle patter against the glass. By dawn, the sea around Black Rock was calm, sunlight glinting off the waves as if the violence of night before had been nothing but a dream. Have you ever been camping in the woods when the weather takes a sudden turn? There's something eerily beautiful about being nestled in a tent whilst rain drums against the canvas above. Quite relaxing, really. At least, that's what I used to think. I wonder, as you're listening to this now, can you hear the rain outside? Or perhaps you're warm and dry, tucked away safely indoors? I envy you that comfort, because ever since that weekend last autumn, the sound of rainfall doesn't bring me peace anymore. Instead, it takes me right back to those woods, to that trail, to that night. I've always been a bit of an outdoor enthusiast. You see, nothing extreme, just weekend hikes and the occasional camping trip. My mates had mostly outgrown it, preferring the comfort of pubs and city breaks. But I still enjoyed the occasional solitary excursion to clear my head. That particular weekend, I'd planned a 2-day trek through Wickwood Forest. It's an ancient woodland in Oxfordshire, not terribly remote by British standards, but secluded enough to feel properly disconnected. The forecast had mentioned a slight chance of rain, but nothing significant. Just a typical autumn weekend in England, cool but manageable. I arrived at the car park near the trailhead around 2 in the afternoon. The sky was overcast, a uniform gray blanket stretching from horizon to horizon, but the air was still dry. I shouldered my rucksack, double-checked my map, and set off along the main path. The plan was simple. Hike about 5 miles in, set up camp in one of the designated areas, and then complete a loop the following day before heading back to the car park. I'd done similar routes dozens of times before. Nothing challenging, nothing dangerous. For the first few hours, everything was precisely as expected. The forest was peaceful, with only the occasional dog walker or fellow hiker passing by. The trails were well marked, and despite the gloomy sky, the temperature remained pleasant enough for walking. Around 5 o'clock, I noticed the first few droplets of rain, just a light drizzle at first. Hardly worth stopping to put on my waterproofs. But within half an hour, the heavens truly opened. The rain came down in sheets, pounding against the leaf litter and turning the dirt path into slick mud beneath my boots. I paused under a particularly dense canopy of trees to pull on my rain jacket and cover my rucksack. According to my map, I had about another mile before reaching the camping area. The sensible thing would have been to press on, but as I studied the increasingly soggy paper map, I noticed a small trail branching off to the right that I hadn't spotted before. It wasn't marked on my map, but it seemed well-trodden, winding deeper into a particularly ancient-looking section of the forest. And if my sense of direction was correct, it would actually cut off a significant corner on my planned route, getting me to the camping area more quickly, with the rain intensifying and daylight already beginning to fade earlier than I'd anticipated. The shortcut seemed like a stroke of good fortune. I folded my map away inside my waterproof jacket and set off down the unmarked path. The trail was narrower than a main route, forcing me to walk single file between dense undergrowth. The trees here were older, their trunks wider and more gnarled, their branches forming a twisted canopy overhead that seemed to trap the gloom beneath it. Despite the thick foliage, it offered surprisingly little shelter from the strengthening downpour. 20 minutes along this new path, I began to question my decision. The trail hadn't rejoined the main route as I'd expected. Instead, it seemed to be leading deeper into an increasingly wild part of the forest. The ground underfoot had become treacherously slick, and twice I nearly lost my footing on exposed roots hidden beneath muddy puddles. I stopped and pulled out my map again, but the paper was now soaked through, the ink beginning to run in places. I tried to match what I could see around me to what was marked, but nothing aligned. Logically, I knew I should turn back, retrace my steps to the main path. But the rain was now coming down so heavily that the thought of extending my journey was distinctly unappealing. Besides, I reasoned, all paths in these woods must eventually lead somewhere. British forests aren't vast wilderness areas. Eventually, I'd hit a road, a village, or circle back to a main trail. So I pressed on, the rain drumming against my hood, my breath fogging in the increasingly chilly air. As dusk approached, the forest took on a different character. The rain seemed to amplify every other sound, the creak of branches, the rustle of leaves, the occasional snap of twigs. I found myself walking faster, eager to reach the camping area before complete darkness fell. But the path showed no signs of ending or rejoining a main route. If anything, it seemed to be growing even less distinct, as if fewer and fewer people had trodden this way. Eventually, I had to switch on my head torch, its beam cutting weakly through the rain and gathering gloom. I'm not sure exactly when I first got the feeling I wasn't alone, but once it took hold, I couldn't shake it. Have you ever had that sensation? Like you're being watched? Like there are eyes on you from somewhere just beyond the reach of your vision? I kept glancing back over my shoulder, but all I could see was the murky darkness of the forest behind me, raindrops catching in my torchlight. The rational part of my brain knew it was just nerves. Being lost in an unfamiliar part of the woods as night fell would make anyone jumpy. And yet, I quickened my pace further, my boots squelching the mud. The rain was relentless now, a constant, pounding rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat. I was soaked through despite my waterproofs, water running down my neck and making me shiver. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, I spotted something through the trees ahead, a small clearing. Relief flooded through me. Even if it wasn't the designated camping area, it would be a place to set up my tent and get out of this wretched downpour. I hurried forward, pushing through a final barrier of wet underbrush, and emerged into a roughly circular space perhaps 15 meters across. The rain fell unobstructed here, but the ground was relatively flat, suitable for camping. As I swept my torchlight around the clearing, something caught my eye near the far edge. At first, I thought it was just another tree, but its shape was too regular, too artificial. Moving closer, I realized it was a small stone structure, something like a shepherd's hut or an old gamekeeper's shelter. It was crude but solid, built from rough-hewn local stone with a slate roof. A single small window, now empty of glass, gaped darkly at me. Beside it was a low doorway, the wooden door hanging askew from rusted hinges. I hesitated. On one hand, a solid structure will provide better shelter than my tent in this weather. On the other hand, there was something unsettling about finding this hut so deep in the woods, unmarked on any map. But the rain was coming down harder than ever, and my fingers were growing numb with cold. Practical concerns went out over vague unease. I approached the hut and shone my torch through the doorway. The interior was small and simple. A single room with a dirt floor. There was an ancient-looking stone fireplace on one wall, a rough wooden shelf, and what might once have been a bed frame, but was now just a pile of rotting timber in one corner. The roof appeared intact, though, and it was blessedly dry inside. I ducked to the low doorway, setting my rucksack down with a sigh of relief. The sound of the rain was muffled now, a gentle patter on the slate above rather than the driving deluge outside. I decided to try and make myself comfortable. While a fire would have been wonderful, all the wood for miles around would be soaking wet. Instead, I changed into dry clothes, laid out my sleeping bag on the cleanest patch of floor I could find, and prepared a cold meal of trail mix and energy bars. As I sat there, chewing mechanically on my unappetizing dinner, I found my gaze continually drawn to the small window. From where I sat, all I could see was darkness, an oppressive, absolute black that seemed to press against the glass like something tangible. I switched off my head torch briefly, hoping my eyes would adjust and I might see stars or the outline of trees. But there was nothing, just that impenetrable wall of darkness. I quickly turned the light back on, an inexplicable shiver running down my spine. To distract myself, I explored the hut more thoroughly. The shelf held a few items, an ancient tin mug corroded with rust, a broken clay pipe, and most interestingly, a small leather-bound book. The book's pages were yellowed and warped with age and damp, but parts were still legible. It appeared to be a journal of sorts, dating from the 1920s based on a few dates I could make out. The handwriting was spidery and difficult to decipher, especially by torchlight, but I managed to read fragments. It belonged to someone named Thomas, apparently a gamekeeper or forester who used his hut as a base. Most entries were mundane, notes about weather, wildlife sightings, tasks completed. But as I flipped through, the tone of the entries changed. Thomas began writing about strange noises in the woods at night, about feeling watched, about paths that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. In one particularly clear passage, he wrote, "The rain came again tonight, always the rain, and with it the whispers. They're closer now. I should never have followed the unmarked trail." I closed the book with a snap, suddenly aware how silent it had become outside. The rain had stopped, not gradually petered out, but stopped all at once, as if someone had turned off a tap. The silence was absolute, oppressive, and then I heard it, a soft, wet sound from outside, like footsteps in mud, circling the hut, slow, deliberate steps that paused occasionally, as if whatever made them was listening. I held my breath, ears straining. There was again a squelching step, followed by another. They didn't sound like animal movements. They were too measured, too purposeful. "Hello," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there?" No response, just another squelching step, closer to the door now. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering against my ribs. "Who's there?" I demanded, louder this time, trying to sound authoritative rather than terrified. A new sound answered me, a low, wet rasp, like someone trying to speak through a mouthful of liquid. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Through the window came a subtle change in the quality of the darkness, a deeper shadow moving against the black backdrop. I caught a glimpse of something pale pressing against the glass, something that might have been a face, but was too elongated, too wrong in its proportions. I staggered backwards, knocking over my rucksack. The thing at the window jerked at the noise, and then the doorway darkened as something began to squeeze through it. I couldn't see it clearly, just an impression of something tall and thin, dripping wet, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. The rasping sound grew louder, resolving into words I could almost understand. Pure instinct took over. I grabbed my head torch and flung it directly at the doorway. There was a wet thud, and a sound like steam escaping from a kettle. I didn't wait to see more. I snatched up my rucksack and bolted for the door, charging blindly into the darkness. Something cold and slick brushed against my face as I passed through the doorway, but I didn't stop. I ran headlong into the forest, no thought of direction or path, just desperate to put distance between myself and the hut. The ground was treacherous, mud sucking at my boots, hidden roots threatening to trip me, branches whipped at my face and arms. But still I ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the blood pounding in my ears. Behind me, I heard movement in the underbrush, that same squelching step, but faster now pursuing, and that wet, rasping voice, calling out words that I still couldn't quite make out, but which filled me with a bone-deep dread. I don't know how long I ran, or how far. Time seemed to stretch and distort. My lungs burned, my legs trembled with exhaustion, but the sounds of pursuit never faded. If anything, they grew closer, and then miraculously, I glimpsed lights ahead through the trees. Artificial lights, street lamps, house windows, civilization. I redoubled my efforts, crashing through the last line of undergrowth and onto the edge of a small village. I stood there gasping for breath on a quiet country lane, bent double with my hands on my knees. When I finally straightened and looked back, there was just a dark wall of the forest. No sign of pursuit. No sound except the distant hoot of an owl and my own labored breathing. A passing motorist eventually stopped and gave me a lift to the nearest train station, concerned by my disheveled appearance and wild-eyed panic. I must have looked a right state. Covered in mud, clothes torn, no proper explanation for wandering out of the woods at night in the rain. I never went back to retrieve my abandoned gear. Nothing could have induced me to re-enter those woods. I told myself it had been a homeless person or a poacher who'd been squatting in the hut and was startled by my presence, or that I'd read that old journal and worked myself into such a state of fear that my mind had conjured phantoms from shadow and sound. Except a week later, I tried to find that section of Wickwood Forest on detailed Ordnance Survey maps. I wanted to report the incident, just in case there really was someone dangerous lurking in those woods. But I couldn't locate the area. The unmarked trail I followed doesn't exist on any map. Neither does the clearing or the stone hut. And sometimes, on rainy nights like this one, I wake up to the sound of wet, squelching footsteps outside my bedroom window, and a rasping voice that whispers words I can almost, but not quite understand. Would you like to know what I think it's saying? I believe it's trying to invite me back to that trail, trying to lure me back to whatever waits in those ancient woods when the rain comes down. So the next time you're listening to the rain pattering against your window, remember my story, and perhaps ask yourself, is it really just rain you're hearing? Or is something else moving out there in the darkness, drawing ever closer with each wet, squelching step? Would you dare to look?